All right, so let's jump into the time machine. Head back to ancient China. We're diving deep into the Warring States period, a time, as many know, as a time of political chaos and philosophical showdowns. You shared some fascinating sources with us about King Quan of Qi, a powerful ruler, and Mencius, this renowned philosopher who really, dared to challenge him. Get this, their story. This isn't just some dusty history lesson. We're gonna see how this clash of ideals and pragmatism, echoes through time. It even pops up in poetry centuries later. So buckle up, because we're about to uncover. You know why leadership is so much more than just wearing a fancy crown.
Yeah. What's really captivating here is that the story isn't about, you know, who was right or wrong. It's really like a case study in this timeless struggle that leaders face,
Yeah.
trying to balance, their personal convictions with the often messy realities of power. King Swan found himself in a real predicament after conquering this state of Yan, and he had to withdraw his troops due to internal resistance, pressure from other powers. This retreat, though likely strategic, really dealt a blow to his pride.
Yeah, I can imagine that didn't sit well with a powerful king. It's like, winning a game, but then having to forfeit because everyone's ganging up on you. So how does Mencius, the philosopher, enter this already tense situation?
Well, Mencius, he was known for his strong moral principles, uh, rooted in Confucianism. Confucianism, just to clarify, is a system of ethics, emphasizing, family, respect for authority, and social harmony. One of its core values is this idea of filial piety. That's deep respect for, your parents and your elders. King Xuan, he was really feeling the pressure of this tarnished image. So he was particularly sensitive to Mencius's judgment. And this is where Chen Jia, an advisor, kind of tried to play the role of peacemaker.
Chen Jia, the guy who history kind of remembers for all the wrong reasons, like being famous for tripping on stage at the Oscars. So how did he try to smooth things over between the king and the philosopher?
Chen Jia tries a really clever tactic. He challenges Mencius with a story about the legendary Duke Zhu. Even though Duke Zhu is considered a sage, he made a mistake. He appointed his brother, Guan Shu, to this really powerful position, and then Guan Shu rebelled. Chen Jia is basically saying to Mencius, look, even the wisest people make mistakes. Maybe King Swan deserves a little slack for this whole Yan situation.
That's pretty clever. Using, a historical parallel to try and create a loophole for the king. So did Mencius by it.
Well, not really. He gives this really layered, nuanced response. First, he explains the Duke Zhu's mistake.
It was understandable due to filial piety. Brothers are supposed to look out for each other, right? So even a sage might initially trust a family member, even if, that trust is betrayed. But here's where Mencius gets to the heart of the matter. He contrasts how these ancient gentlemen would, acknowledge their mistakes openly, and they would correct them. And they would actually earn even more respect for that. Modern gentlemen, he kind of implies, just make excuses, and they try to, sweep their blunders under the rug.
Ooh, burn. He's calling out both Chen Jia for making excuses and King Xuan for not owning up to his miscalculation. It's like he's saying, hey, people used to have integrity. What happened? This is where that whole eclipse analogy comes in, right? Exactly. Mencius says the mistakes of ancient gentlemen were like eclipses, visible for all to see. And, when they corrected those mistakes, it only reinforced their authority. But these modern gentlemen, he's arguing, not only, accept their faults, but they try to justify them. Now, he doesn't name any names, but it's a pretty scathing critique of, current leadership.
Well, Chen Jia, trying to defend the king, ends up becoming the poster child for flimsy justifications. And this is where it gets wild. Centuries later, during the Song Dynasty, another official named Chen Jia, what are the odds, gets, roasted in poems for criticizing a famous Confucian scholar. It's like his name became synonymous with, defending the indefensible.
And this whole situation, it highlights the importance of alliances during this warring states period,
Yeah, it's fascinating how even back then, managing public perception, it was so crucial for rulers. It's like the ancient world had its own version of spin doctors, So alliances aside, let's get back to King Swan's predicament. So he's stuck between a rock and a hard place. Between, Mencius's ideals and the realities of power. What's the smart play here?
Well, it's the million-dollar question.
Right.
You see, even if a king knew, he'd messed up, admitting it, publicly could be incredibly risky. Think about it. In a time of, constant warfare, a ruler needs to project strength, inspire confidence. Openly saying, oops, my bad, could make allies nervous, and embolden rivals.
Right. So how did leaders, navigate this tightrope? Were there any like spectacular failures, like, a king blaming his pet turtle for like a military blunder?
Oh, I'm sure there were some creative excuses lost to history. But really, deflecting blame was a delicate art. A clever ruler, they might, blame a bad advisor, point to, like, misleading intel, even frame it as a necessary sacrifice for the greater good. Anything to maintain that aura of control and, wisdom.
Oh, it's like the ancient world's version of the dog ate my homework. But with much, much higher stakes. Was this kind of blame deflection, was that common in like other cultures too?
Absolutely. The idea that a ruler, they must maintain a facade of infallibility. This pops up all throughout history. I mean, think of concepts like papal infallibility or, the king can do no wrong. These ideas reinforce the notion that the leader's authority, is divinely ordained or unquestionable, even when they make mistakes.
It's making me see King Swan in a new light, actually. He's not just a proud ruler trying to save face. He's playing the game of power by the rules of his era, but where does that leave Mencius, in his call for moral leadership?
That's where the tension between, idealism and pragmatism, it becomes really, really interesting. Because Mencius, as a scholar, he was advocating for a ruler who embraced learning from mistakes,
Yeah.
a leader who valued honesty and, self-reflection. But those ideals, they might not have been very practical in the cutthroat world of the Warring States period.
So it's like Mencius is holding King Swan to the standards of like a philosophy seminar, while the king is in the middle of like a political MMA match, basically. No wonder they're clashing.
That's a great analogy, yeah. And it really highlights the dilemma, faced by so many rulers during this period. They were bombarded by all these competing philosophies, historical interpretations.
Yeah.
And this ever-present pressure to appear, invincible, figuring
Yeah.
out the right course of action. Oh, that would have been incredibly difficult.
It's almost like Mencius, with his focus on ethics, he kind of underestimated how much people crave a leader who appears, flawless, almost godlike. Makes you wonder if even he, if he were king, if he could have lived up to his own lofty standards.
That's a question worth pondering. Could anyone, faced with the challenges of ruling, a war-torn nation, could they truly maintain a perfect moral compass? It also makes you think about the type of leader that we, as citizens are really drawn to. Do we prefer someone who's, open about their flaws, or someone who projects an image of unwavering strength, even if it's a facade?
It's a fascinating dilemma with no easy answers. And this whole deep dive, it's really made me realize how much history is about grappling with, these shades of gray. It's not just about, memorizing names and dates. But before we wrap up, there's one more point in the source material that I found really intriguing. It mentions how this whole Warring States period, it was rife with like alliances, even among these like rival kingdoms. Why would they cooperate amidst all this power grabbing?
That's an excellent observation. And honestly, it's often overlooked. It shows that even in a period of really intense conflict,
Yeah.
diplomacy, strategic partnerships, those were absolutely essential. No state, no matter how powerful, could survive completely on its own. They needed allies, for trade, for military support, and to counterbalance, the ambitions of their rivals.
But the sources also say that historians didn't like have the full picture of these alliances.
Right. So is it possible, there's more to King Wan's actions against Yan than we know. Maybe he was like pressured by allies, or there were like secret deals going on behind the scenes.
Oh, it's definitely possible. History's like a puzzle, with some missing pieces. We can analyze the pieces we have, but there are always gaps in our understanding, and that's what makes it so compelling. We're left to speculate, to connect the dots, and imagine, the untold stories. That might help explain, these historical events.
Okay, so we've got King Wan. He's trying to balance like moral leadership with, realpolitik. Mencius challenging him with, Confucian ideals. And this whole web of alliances, it's shaping the bigger picture. It's a lot to unpack. But I'm starting to see how these seemingly separate threads, they connect.
Yeah.
To create this complex, historical tapestry. Exactly. And that's what makes, this deep dive so rewarding. We're not just learning about, a specific event. We're exploring, these enduring themes of leadership, ethics, the challenges of navigating power in a world that's full of uncertainty.
So as we emerge from our time machine,
Right.
and return to the present, what are the key takeaways that we should carry with us? This whole this whole deep dive has really made me think about what makes a leader truly effective. Is this someone who sticks to their principles no matter what, like Mencius? Or is this someone who's willing to, bend the rules, make these tough choices like King Juan?
Yeah, it's rarely black and white. I mean, this deep dive into King Xuan's dilemma, it reveals how effectively leading during a time of crisis often, requires a leader to balance these ethical ideals with strategic pragmatism. I mean, sometimes, a ruler might have to make a decision that might seem morally questionable on the surface, but ultimately it serves, the greater good. And the challenge really is knowing where to draw that line, and understanding the long-term consequences of those choices.
Yeah, yeah, it's like that classic saying, heavy is the head that wears the crown, and it makes you wonder, like, what kind of leadership style would have truly thrived during the chaos of the Warring States period? Was there even, like, a right way to rule back then?
Well, you have to remember, it was a time of constant upheaval, uncertainty. Imagine, trying to maintain order, security, while being surrounded by all these rivals who are constantly, scheming, vying for power. I mean, there were different schools of thought about leadership, with some advocating for strong, central authority, others emphasizing the importance of virtue, moral persuasion.
It sounds like a political pressure cooker. So in that kind of environment, would it have been better for a ruler to be, like, loved or feared?
Well, that's another timeless question about leadership, isn't it?
Yeah.
Some philosophers, like Hans Sesi, he believed that rulers, they should prioritize, maintaining order and control, even if it meant being feared. Others, like, Confucius and Mencius, they emphasize the importance of leading by example, cultivating virtue, and inspiring, loyalty through, just and benevolent rule.
It's interesting how these debates about leadership, from ancient China, they still resonate today, don't they? We still grapple with these same questions about power,
Right.
ethics, and, what it means to be a good leader. It's like these philosophers were wrestling with, like, these timeless human dilemmas.
And that's why studying history is so valuable. It's not just about memorizing, dates and names. It's about understanding, like, the continuity of human experience. And these ancient stories, they provide us with this lens, for examining our own values and the choices that we make, and, both our personal and professional lives.
Yeah, this episode has definitely given me a lot to ponder, that's for sure. I'm going to be thinking about, King Xuan, Mencius, and that whole Yan situation for a while. It's amazing how a single historical event can, spark so many questions about leadership, morality, the nature of power.
And remember, this is just one small slice of this Warring States period, right?
Right.
This era was a crucible of ideas, innovations, not just in politics,
Right.
but in philosophy, art, military strategy.
Yeah.
It was a time of both intense conflict and incredible creativity.
Yeah, it sounds like the Warring States period. It deserves its own, deep dive series, honestly. There's so much more to explore, so much more to uncover. But for now, I think we've given our listeners plenty to chew on, do I think?
We certainly have. We really hope that this deep dive, has inspired you to learn more about this, fascinating period in Chinese history. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought. Just think about the kind of leader that you admire, whether it's a historical figure or a contemporary politician, or even someone, in your own personal life. And just ask yourself, what qualities make them effective? How do they navigate the complexities of power, of decision-making? And reflecting on these questions can really help us, to better understand the challenges of leadership and the kind of world that we want to create.
Well said. It's a reminder that history, it's not just about the past. It's about understanding, ourselves and the world around us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep exploring, and keep those questions coming.